Thanks for listening to the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour. 1 hour of tips from experts and real stories from people just like you. For those thinking about what lies ahead, for those going through the job search, and those who have paved the way to their next career after the military. These professionals are dedicated to helping you move forward successfully to the next phase of your career after the military. Welcome to Exchange.
We start our episodes with the segment of In the Soup. And today's guest is unusual because he's kind of like, well, reheated soup. He's been in the soup once. He's going back into the soup, and he is a dual, let's say a dual transition. Okay, we'll just call him a re-souper. We'll just say hi, John McGlothlin. It's such a pleasure to have you here. I'm really interested in hearing your story. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to talking with you about it.
John was funny. He said to me, yeah, Cheryl, you don't have to prep me. I'm an extrovert. I can talk about anything. But what I really wanted to talk to you about is not just your dual transition, but all the things that you've done. You've gotten a law degree. You've written a book. You've had a really interesting life. One of your MOSs was intelligence. So why don't you just launch and tell us about what it's maybe like coming through this the second time? Is it easier, better, faster, stronger, more?
I'm lucky that I've already transitioned out once. So in 2012, I wrapped up 9 years of active duty service as an Arabic linguist, human intelligence guy, and paratrooper. And I was stationed in Italy. And obviously the first time you do something like transition out of the military, hopefully will be the most challenging. And I had the added challenge of doing it while I was stationed in Europe. So things like figuring out where I was going to live, looking for jobs, that sort of process was complicated by the fact that I was trying to do everything, different time zones, different continent. After that, I settled into a groove, thank you in large part to the GI Bill. I went to law school at UVA, University of Virginia, and that transition was a bit of a challenge, and I'll get more into detail as we go. But I eventually settled in, figured out what people did and did not like in terms of the parts of my personality that were great fits in the military, which one of those I should stick with and which ones needed a little refining now that I was out of the military. And got back into a groove as a civilian, worked as a DoD contractor, worked at a law firm. And then I stayed in the National Guard. I enjoyed being a soldier, but I needed to live in a big city and pursue some other goals, which is why I left active duty. But after January 6th, and after the mobilization after George Floyd was killed, I spent more time in uniform than I had in a while. And I thought this is actually very fulfilling work. Now I was a JAG. After going to law school, I'd switched over from human. I'd gone from being an enlisted and warrant to being an officer. So now I was a JAG officer. And I went full-time again. And I've been full-time military for a little over 2 years now. And then I'll be transitioning again, probably, next year. So I get to do it again. And I'm doing it from a different place, so it's not a perfect comparison. But I do have the added perspective of having done it before. And I'm thankful for that, and I look towards doing it again.
Question I have for you, and I hear this a lot. There's a lot of pressure to stay, and some people feel that now you've done the process already, so you could probably teach it, right? But they say to me, I feel like the process is complicated for a reason, and that's to get people to stay. Have you encountered that rather?
I've encountered the complexity. I don't think that's the reason. I think that any organization that has over 1 million people in it, it's going to be complicated to make any kind of major move, changing statuses within the military or leaving it. So I don't think it's complicated as part of a strategy that anyone has to make it difficult to leave. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to do that much. Now, if you want all the benefits you're entitled to, if you want to leave in a certain way at a certain time and take all the vacation you have, then yes, it gets more complicated. But no, I think it's just complicated because we are trying, I can say we now, even though nothing I'm saying on behalf of the Department of Defense. Let me put that out there. Any large organization, you're trying to plan, like how many people do I have at different stages of the career? We have to try and keep everything staffed. So I think it's complicated because of all the moving pieces, not because they're trying to make people stick around through making it hard to leave.
Got it. No conspiracy theory today. Wonderful. Now, your first transition versus this upcoming transition, what are the key differences?
The first one was a complete change in virtually everything in my life. What continent I was living on, what type of thing I would be doing, going from working to going to being a student again. I was single at the time, and I was like, I'm going to die alone if I stay in an airborne infantry unit. There is just no one to date. So I was looking to make that change too, and live in a more stable environment, live in a big city instead of middle of nowhere. All those sorts of things. This transition is going to be different in that I want to stay in the same city. I'm married now, so I'm trying to change certain things, but I'm trying to keep a lot of things the same. And in some ways, that's more challenging. Wiping the entire slate clean, you walk up to a blackboard, you can erase everything. You just grab an eraser and get moving. But if you have to keep this line and that thing, then you have to be a more deliberate about how you approach it. So I think that's probably the biggest difference, wiping the entire slate clean versus trying to keep a lot of what I've got going on this time.
Was it difficult for you to realize what it is you needed to do in order to move forward? And I ask that because
First time, absolutely.
I wrote a book, which is a 3-year planning guide. And I'm finding that a lot of people, my audience is very small. Not a lot of people are planning that far in advance. They're rounding the curve, which is why I wrote the book. Because I saw a lot of people coming to me as a corporate recruiter who had just rounded the curve and like, hey, what do you got? Like, no, you don't. That's not how you plan a career. That's not how you go get a job. So go into more detail on that and some of the pre-planning things you did, or was it just by the seat of your pants
It
the
was by the
first
seat of my
time?
pants, more than it should have been. I was lucky that I had the GI Bill and had a seat at the law school I was going to. So that gave me some structure. But I still underplanned. Now, granted, that's part of that is my default personality is an underplanner, an under worrier. I don't tend to stress out, but I don't always plan as much as I should either. And I've worked on that, since 2012, but that's always going to be my default setting to some degree. So I got 3 days. I needed a book about 3 years of planning. And what I actually got was 3 days of transition assistance that was about as good as 3 days is going to be. The instructor was great. They were smart, invested, personable, all those things. But everybody who went through that process and sat in that room with me was making their own type of transition. The guy next to me literally had 3 kids and was leaving we were both enlisted, but I had my degree already and was going to go to grad school, and he hadn't gone to college at all. So what was being taught only affected both of us some of the time.
Right.
So no, that would have been useful for me to have. I was much more of a by the seat of my pants than I was a deliberate planner the first time I transitioned out.
Which is hilarious because the name of your book is
How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, the Paratrooper's Guide to Life. And it was a result of, more than anything else, the mixed bag of a transition I had. Now, overall, I had a great time, but the people dealing with me did not always have a great time because I retained too much of sarcasm and bluntness and brusqueness sometimes, more than was ideal for the environment that I was in now. So it took me a few years. I got out in 2012. I didn't write the book for 10 years after I left. And that gave me enough time to look at, okay, here's the lessons the military taught me that you don't see in books and movies. And then I didn't realize I had learned. I didn't really know what I was good at. The skills that I had that were most valuable in the civilian world. Because most of the time when you leave the military, and that's not true for like finance folks, personnel folks, some jobs that are analogous, but for most of us, the technical thing we were good at, we're not going to do anymore. So, okay, what does that leave us with? And what I grew to appreciate were the lessons that I'd learned, often just implicitly while in the military, that don't get taught either anywhere else or barely get taught anywhere else. So I distilled those lessons into the book, and if anything, it was a good exercise for me to share with other military people, hey, these are the things we're best at. These are the things you can lean on when you're making that transition and you're not quite sure how to package yourself or see yourself in this new environment.
mm-hmm. Now you're on your book tour. It's only been a year or so since the time of this recording. How has the book gone for you, and how has that experience? And I'm speaking to you as an author because it's just been a wild ride for me. How's it been for you?
It's been good. It's been good. It was always meant to be a complementary thing to my main career. And it's staying that way for now. But I've had enough interest from podcasts I've done, HR companies I've come into contact with, that I am developing a training course based off the book in partnership with one of the HR consultancies that I've met. So it may yet become my full-time job. As I make this second transition out of the full-time military, I'll need to do something. So I'm lucky to have options with a law degree, but the book has been a great experience I'd never written anything that long before. I had a background as a journalist and a speechwriter, but it was a new experience for me to write it. It was a good way to, as I mentioned, distill what the military really has to offer and maybe what I have to offer as somebody with that military experience. So it's been good overall, mostly a complimentary thing, but potentially a main thing moving forward.
I believe, and maybe you believe this too, John, everyone has a book within them. And with the self-publishing world, I'm a self-published author. My company, I started an LLC for both the podcast and the book. It's been a wonderful experience for me. But I've had a book in me for a long time. So I want to just take a moment for any of you listening, please write that book. If you have a book in you, write it. Because the landscape, I mean, you might not pay the bills with it, but the experience is glorious. And it has put me in front of people. Just the fact that I can say I'm an author. And then 5 days after my release, I was #1 in its division within Amazon. Like that to me is just, it's like riding a wave. Like you're finally standing up on the surfboard. I mean, it might not last forever. My second book might not get to #1 or whatever, but the experience has been fabulous. How has it impacted your life? I'm curious.
It's definitely fleshed out the way I think about things and the way I approach things. Plus, if you live a book about how to deal with life, you definitely feel like you have to live up to the lessons in your own book, which puts a little good pressure on me to ensure that I am practicing what I preach. It is the military incorporates in almost every job it has an element of coaching, mentoring, teaching. At least once you're people don't understand who were not in the military about how quickly you can be a leader. You'll see 18, 19, 20-year-olds in charge of the basically entire existence of maybe 2 people, maybe a whole squad. So it's amazing how quickly you become a mentor and a guide for people. And that's not a part of civilian jobs to anywhere near the same degree. And I haven't had soldiers in forever. As a JAG, I don't have soldiers the way I did sometimes as an enlisted leader. So it's been good for me to keep nurturing that side of me that does value. And I teach as an adjunct professor, and that's something I greatly enjoy. But it's also its own type of thing. So the book has been a great way for me to continue to try to refine what lessons do I think I've learned? How can they be useful to other people? Because you don't just want to. There's nothing wrong with writing a book to just tell your story. That's absolutely worth doing. I don't know if my story was unique enough, honestly, to do that. I think what I had to bring to the table were the lessons I learned about how the military can help anyone learn how to develop. So it's been good for me to exercise that sharing, mentoring, teaching part of my brain.
I like that. One of the reasons I started this podcast, aside from the fact that I used to interview a lot of people as a corporate recruiter, I was a broadcaster, and I missed interviewing and I wanted to do something behind a microphone, so it made sense. But the other part is exactly that, is getting the voices of transition out there. And this is my offering to the world. Like, you're going to learn more through these stories than you might in a book, even though I wrote a book. It's really exposing the issues in a broader way. So thanks for saying that. What are some of the tips and tricks that really are the common themes other than what the military taught you?
What I've learned since leaving the full-time military is that there is a set of lessons, what I call the hidden side of the military, that you don't see in most books and movies about the military for good reason. They're more subtle, they're funnier, but they're more practical and more useful for day-to-day life. And I want to take those lessons and those traits and that approach to development and bring it to a wider audience.
And what are some of those lessons?
So I broke it down into 5 traits because you have to make it digestible in order to make it useful for people. So I'll give you the first one first. It's a logical place to start. It is self-awareness. And you spend so much time around people in the military that people have a difficult or almost impossible time keeping up a facade. We just see each other too often. Whereas maybe you see your boss in a civilian job once a day, maybe less, depending on what kind of job you have. That's usually not the case in the military. So people have to grapple with who they really are and other people's response to that in a way that really promotes self-awareness. And that allows people to know what they need to work on in a way that you can sometimes hide elsewhere. Not to say there's no place in the military where you can hide, but it's a lot harder to do. So that was the place where I wanted to start. The book gets into, before that, why this gap exists that I think these traits fill, why schools and workplaces generally don't fill this gap. They just have, it's not that they don't care about you, they just have other goals to accomplish. And then the first step towards filling that gap ourselves is working on being more self-aware.
You talk about those other goals. Can you flesh that out for our listening audience, a lot of whom have not experienced the corporate world or the civilian workplace?
Sure, we take for granted, at least I did in the military, the fact that we assume everyone's going to improve, or at least is going to be given a lot of chances to improve. One of the first things I did after leaving the full-time military was go to South by Southwest, which is the big music and film festival in Austin, but also has a business, a tech component. And I picked out interesting looking seminars to go to and random little speakers and stuff. And one of the ones I went to was, are superstar performers worth it? And the idea behind the panel was it asked, if your high performers are also pains in the ass to everyone, is it worth having those type of people around? And nobody ever said anything about making them not a pain in the ass anymore. Nobody even discussed developing this person or training them or improving them. It was just like, well, they suck at this. And people treated it like a law of nature that was unchangeable. And I was just dumbfounded. I was like, well, why don't, you're not going to take a person with no people skills and turn him into Prince Charming, but maybe you can make them less annoying. Like, let's at least talk about, and if that's impossible, how can you tell when it's impossible? But there was no talk about developing people at all. And that was my first kind of warning, that the military's approach towards improvement and the idea that everybody's going to get reps, everybody's going to get a chance, is not copied in the civilian world. They pretty much assume that and they may give you technical knowledge about some system you're working on, but in terms of those more core personal traits, they kind of assume you're just who you are. And if you walk in the door without those traits developed as much as you can, you may not get a chance to improve them.
You're 100% spot on. I've never had a chance to say this on this podcast, but as a consultant, I know this because I work with corporations. Corporations are far more apt to mold around the person, especially the people that are coming in. We look at, as a workforce development person, I look at generations like, boomers, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen A, and then I don't know what the new one's called, beta. I think they're in grade school right now. But we look at that like, how might we have to change our workplaces to be more like them? And the military is like, you need to be like us. This is the construct. This is the box you sit in. Now you're a box. You're a square. You might have been a round peg, but now you're a square. At least that's
Well, in the military, we're not as absolute as that. You're right, and there are things we will not change, but there are adjustments that we will make. Maybe we go from being a rectangle to being one of those, like a racetrack, where like there's ovals in the corner. Like, we're not turning into a complete circle, but we're willing to work around the edges. As an example that's in the book, and I didn't know this story before I did. I tried to do as much research as I could to avoid having the book be literally just one person's anecdotal opinions on stuff. And one of the things I had looked into was the history of basic training. And there is this event known as the shark attack. And the idea is everybody in basic training has one or two drill sergeants, a little team that's in charge of your whole platoon. But what they did is the first moment that basic training started, they brought in all the drill sergeants from neighboring units, and they had this massive gathering, like a little ambush of drill sergeants. And the idea was to establish control over people. But what the military realized is that that was quietly driving people away, because people were making the assumption that their experience was going to be like that. That was a preview of what life was going to be like indefinitely, when in fact it was basically just one day. So what they did, and they didn't do it in response to a scandal. Nobody died, nobody sued, nothing like that. What they realized is that people were leaving the military because of this, so they stopped doing the shark attack. And I looked back, and the reason the shark attack even existed was because in Vietnam, the go to war, go to jail policy that was sometimes in effect, the military was worried that actual criminals would come in and not respect the military norms and literally try to take over the unit. So that's when they instituted this aggressive, intimidating spectacle. And then it just lingered. But eventually the military did realize it and change it. So it was not the shortest timeline to change this, admittedly. But we are willing to examine things and be adaptable more so, I think, than at least more than civilian organizations of the same size.
Thanks for sharing that. I had never heard that story, and now you've given me a great new perspective, so thank you.
Thanks.
You've got your second transition coming up. You've got a law degree. You've got really new tools in your toolbox. What's ahead of you? What are you planning to do? And if I checked in with you in like 2 years, where do you think you're going to be?
Well, there's two paths, really. One is to continue doing work that is the civilian analogy to what I do now, which is whistleblower protection, investigation type work. And that's something that interests me greatly. And there's a role for actually lawyers to do investigations and compliance and oversight type of work. Or I will transition to working primarily based off the book and to doing training courses and working with people to develop them in the same ways the military helped develop me without them having to join the military. And one of the things I try to bring to people is a lot of the military stuff that's out there sells intensity. Get up at 3 a.m., do 1 million push-ups. The idea is that you will get where the best way to get to a better version of yourself is by being more intense all the time. And it's like, no. Intensity will only solve a small sliver of most people's problems. What you really need to do is take this other path that's more deliberate, more step-by-step. It's not to say that there's not effort required, but it's not all about intensity. So that's the second path. The first path is to keep my lawyer hat on and keep working with investigations, compliance, making sure that the law is getting followed and processes are working how they're supposed to for people. Or I'll be doing development work with companies or nonprofits or schools and other organizations based off the lessons encapsulated in the book. So we'll see. Door number 1 or door number 2. TBD about which one.
Wonderful. Well, they both sound very exciting. And as a compliance nerd myself, I really honor the fact that you're wanting to work and support whistleblowers. Compliance is a huge part of my world as an HR consultant, especially working with federal contracts and things like that. So we appreciate you and the work that you do. Thank you so much. We can't do enough of it. And not a lot of people who want to be an attorney want to do that work because it's not that sexy. It's not going to, no one's going to make a movie about, the investigators. Unfortunately.
I've been in a few things that might be movie-like. I'm good. I'd rather watch than star. And one of the things I like about this type of work is you're ensuring that the system works properly, that everybody gets a fair shot. Yes. And the law needs people to represent individual clients and to make sure and to aggressively advocate on behalf of those clients. I am more interested in making sure that everything's working correctly how it's supposed to, maybe building a better version of what we already have. And that is work that structural approach. That's kind of zoom out approach rather than being me versus somebody else arguing on behalf of our respective sides. I can do that. I am not shy about that, but I don't find it nearly as satisfying as zooming out a bit and working from that perspective instead.
If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, John, to become a mentee as you wanted to be a mentor, how might they reach out to you, or is your bandwidth completely full with your trajectory, your upcoming transition? What's going on with that?
I always want people to feel free to reach out, depending on what exactly they're looking for. Now may or may not be the time, but I at least want to keep in touch. And the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. So if you are patient enough to spell my last name correctly and find me on LinkedIn, then you're probably already on your way towards getting where you want to be in life. But yeah, John McGlothlin, or go on Amazon and grab a copy of the book as well. That's also a way to get the best I have to tell you in terms of the lessons that the military has to teach that most people don't get exposed to.
The book title is How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, a Paratrooper's Guide to, finish it for me.
To life.
To life. You can find it on Amazon, and your last name is spelled Eglothhlin. Is that right?
Perfect. Yep. McGloth, like cloth with a G, and then Lynn, Lin. Yeah, there's one small subset of McGlothlins that spell it that way. I went to Ireland on vacation, and they were weirded out by the spelling. I was like, well,
oh, yeah.
If they're not going to understand here, then I used to joke about changing it to Smith, but I think I'm committed at this point.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you and everything that you're doing, including the energy that you've brought to this segment. I'm going to let you wrap up your segment with your very last alibi. Is there anything else you'd like to leave for our listening audience today?
I would like to leave with the thought that improvement is very much possible, and it doesn't require wholesale change, Zen, becoming a perfect person. There are small, practical, achievable steps that can be taken to get you at least meaningfully closer to who you want to be.
Thank you so much. Beautifully said. Thank you, John McGlothlin. It's such a pleasure to have another author and someone who's transitioning not once but twice, who is an attorney and doing some really incredible things. I'll be watching you and keeping my eye on you through LinkedIn. My name is Cheryl Cross. You're listening to the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour. We're going to take a very brief break, and we'll be back with an expert, so stay tuned. Well, each one of my segments is my favorite. I have to say I have special love for my experts because on this show I get the chance to bring in people that do serve the military spouse community, folks coming out of the military, and the veteran community all in one. Maybe you haven't heard of these folks, but I bet you've heard of this lady. Gabrielle Bosché, she is with The Purpose Company. Her book, The Purpose Factor, is out right now, and it's selling like hotcakes. You'll find her on LinkedIn, just like I did. But today, we get to not just see her, but hear her words. Thanks so much for joining us on the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour. Welcome, Gabrielle. How are you doing today?
I'm so good, Cheryl. Thank you so much for having me on this show. I am so excited. When you reached out on LinkedIn, I was like, stop the presses. I've got to get on this show. I love your heart. I love what you're doing. So I'm so excited about this conversation.
Thank you. We were chatting and you were talking about the work you've done in the past, the work that you're planning on with this community. So why don't you go ahead and explore that with us to kind of, gain a bit of trust, and then we'll jump into what the Purpose Factor is and the Purpose Company's vision.
Yes, I love it. Well, you don't go to college to become an expert in purpose. And so my journey kind of started off, as many folks' journeys do, is just trying to find out what was next for me. And so I went to college, as many of us do, kind of looking to what's next and say, like, I want to change the world. I want to make an impact. So for me, when I wanted to go to college, so I went to college and I studied both politics and religion, the two things you're not supposed to talk about at Thanksgiving dinner. I was like, let's double up. And at the end of my college experience, I kind of had this degree in my hand and thought, where am I going to go and what am I going to do? And so my journey moved in and out of politics, in and out of the nonprofit world, in and out of corporate. And I remember I was at a networking event one day, and I just written a book about engaging the next generation called 5 Millennial Myths. And at this networking event, a woman asked me, she said, well, tell me more about what you do. And I said, oh, well, I'm an expert in generational leadership. And she goes, and at that moment, I was very young, I was in my early 20s, and I thought, of course she's going to say, I don't believe you, and show me your certificate, and where's your white lab coat? But instead of challenging me in my expertise, she actually became curious, not critical, and said, tell me more. I think we could really use you. And I said, okay, well, tell me more about where you work. And she said, oh, I work for the Navy. And I looked at her and I said, of the United States? And she said, yes, of the United States.
Navy.
and it became a really beautiful relationship where I've been on over 8 different naval bases and had an opportunity to work with the Air Force and so many other leaders in this community to really focus on. I got in originally working on what we call generational leadership, how your age influences how you make decisions. But after almost a decade of working on generational leadership, what I found was, whether I was working with Google or Microsoft or the Air Force, is at the end of any presentation or consulting engagement, people will come up to me and they say, what works for that next generation, I want that too. And I want that, what they were all saying was, I want purpose. And so that's when we really discovered how purpose personalizes the mission. So as an organization, as an entity, and especially for the armed services that we've come alongside, that question of how do we make it personal to us? We're serving this big M mission, but how do I find my identity in what it is that I'm building and what is it that I'm doing has really been the cornerstone of what we do here at the Purpose Company.
And this is exactly why you're sitting in front of me today talking to me about this, because this community, as I know, is seeking purpose after military service and trying to bridge, and everyone says it's a huge gap. And again, folks, for you listening, I'm a civilian that sat on the recruiting side, that interviewed hundreds, probably thousands of you. I wrote a book, which is a 3-year guide to get ahead of it in hopes that you wouldn't have this gap. But, a plan is just a plan. You can have a plan all day long. Things are going to happen. You might get med boarded. Your 3-year timeline might turn into 6 months. You just don't know. So purpose, if you have that confidence, and I say this all the time, in salary negotiation, which is my next book, I believe that confidence wins the day. And it's not about winning the salary negotiation. It's about getting what you need. And figuring out what you need is tied into what your purpose is. And purpose also drives your next career for the longevity. Sitting in a job is a job. You could do any job. Coming out of the military, I'll build you a house. You might not want to live in it. It might withstand, 20-mile-an-hour winds, but it might not live for 100-mile-an-hour winds. You can do anything, but do you want to just do anything when you get out? Finding that purpose. And this is what resonates so much with me when you speak. When you talk about purpose, how would you work with somebody, say they're thinking about their next career shift, and they come to you and they say, I don't know what I want to do. Mm-hmm. How do you prompt them?
That's so good. That question of what's next for me is actually the foundation of so much of the work that we do at the Purpose Company. And so we work with, I just worked with actually last week, 3 Marines who came to our offices who were like, I'm trying to figure out what's next, and helping them get clear about their message and their offer and how they can actually bring it to the marketplace, which is really important. But that question of what's next, I think, is one of the foundational elements of what makes us such curious creatures. But if I were to sit down with someone and they said, hey, Gab, I'm really trying to figure out what's next for me, I would go through 2 sets of questions. The first set of questions would be, Cheryl, tell me more about your most fulfilled day at work. What were you doing? Who were you helping? Who were you serving? And most importantly, what kinds of problems were you solving? So many times we talk about fulfillment as this, ethereal thing that's, fluffy and nice and fun. But in reality, fulfillment can actually be broken down on a scientific spectrum. It's cause and effect. I do something and then I feel something. So if I serve you in a very specific way based off of the skills that I've developed and the story I'm telling myself and others, that's when fulfillment starts to happen. So we define purpose as the best of what you have inside of you to help other people. And fulfillment is the result of helping other people. So if people are looking to find their purpose, sometimes we'll back into it by just having a quick conversation. What's most fulfilling to you? What types of problems do you want to solve? The second set of questions I would really focus on is, who do you want to serve? So oftentimes a conversation around purpose is focused on the why, but I actually think it's more productive to talk about the who. So many times we're drawn to help people who are like us, who are the before picture, the people who want what we have or want to see the world the way that we see the world, or want to experience things that we've developed. And so if we actually look at who is it that we feel most drawn to help, and usually it's people who are before picture, the 5 years before where we're currently at. Those are the people who we oftentimes have the most authority around, because your story is your authority. They're usually the people we can most relate to, and it's oftentimes the people who we truly can help. So that confidence factor goes through the roof, because we know it works because it worked for us, so it's going to work for them. So if I just had a few minutes to sit down with someone over coffee, those are the 2 sets of questions. At the end of that set of questions, certainly you can learn more in the book, The Purpose Factor. We've got a whole assessment we can have people take to actually get clear on what that means for them and how it actually can help them make better decisions in their life and their work. But if I only had a few minutes to really get some grippiness on things, because I know what it feels like to not know what's next. You're in a spiral. You feel like, oh my gosh, is everything that I've done for naught? Do I go up or down? You feel like you're drowning underwater. But to get clarity on the best of what you have to help other people and how to actually create a career from it, no matter your experience, that I think is one of the most profound things that any of us can do when we're really looking to the future.
Your story is your authority. Can you dig deeper into that?
We talk so much about this in our TED Talk, actually. My husband, Brian, and I are one of the only couples who've actually done a TEDx talk together. It's called Your Purpose is Your Permission. And as we were preparing to do this TEDx, when TED came to us, they said, what can you really provide? And what we saw was so many times people know they have a purpose in the generalized kind of, you are special sense. But beyond that, it was, how do you actually operationalize this? And we noticed 2 things. The first was, so many people aren't even going down the path of discovering their purpose because they feel like they don't have permission. They don't feel like they're worthy. They don't feel like it's a good use of time. They've spent their entire life or career putting other people in front of themselves. And they've kind of just said, or even settled to say, my purpose is to be a good dad. My purpose is to be a good mom or a good sister or a good employee or a good service member. And although that's important, that's the first rung of meaning. I want to get them way beyond where they're experiencing fulfillment on demand, that they have those pinch me moments. I can't believe I get paid to do this. Like, are you looking at this? This thing's incredible. Like, you have that one life to live kind of all-star moment. So when we started to prepare, we're like, you need to have permission. But the second thing is can you break down what you have experienced so that way you can actually create building blocks for other people to follow? Because so many times people think, like I did the first time I said that I was an expert, I thought, I need to scale the mountain. I need to have the white lab coat. I need the PhD. Then I'll have the authority. Not only that, then I'll have the confidence to say, yes, I can actually help you. But I got the degrees. I walked across the platforms. I did all the fancy certifications. I spent lots of time and money, and I didn't feel any more confident after than I did before. And what I realized, the only key that actually made me feel like, Cheryl, I absolutely can help you, was the fact that I'd done it for myself. And so your story really breaks down into a couple key elements. I won't necessarily go into all of it here, but one of them is what we call your origin story, which is the moment or series of moments that most shape your perspective. If you've identified that one series of events or one single event that has made you see the world a specific way, you can then find points of connection with people to say, I know this is how you see the world. I know this is the type of problem you want to solve. It creates a really beautiful through line when you can then determine, I can solve these types of problems because I've been solving these problems for myself my entire life. And those are the things, we call it your brilliance, but it's stuff that you've been doing your whole life that you haven't even realized. And so that's what a lot of people talk about, your brilliance, being in flow, all of those elements a lot of times you hear out there. That's really what it means, is you've been doing it for a long time for yourself. Why not get paid to do it for other people?
Thank you. Yes. And you're hitting the nail on the head over and over and over. I almost feel like you have a hammer in your hand. Thank you for saying this. This is so important to talk just specifically about purpose. I think purpose motivates us. I'm a big Blue Zones fan. Dan Buttner was one to talk about purpose and leading with purpose when they did all that work looking at the genetics and the longevity of certain populations. And one of my favorite places, Okinawa, really scored high. And it wasn't just because of genes. It wasn't because of all about environment or the food they ate. It had a lot to do with purpose. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I meet, and I always think about this with someone who's older, much older than me, if they lack purpose, they become depressed, and then they usually get sick. And then you watch them kind of fade away. Let's get back to the military community in sense of what you see in themes.
I think the first thing, and I think truly the most important thing, is clarity. So many times we don't take action because we don't know where we're going. We would take the action. If I were to give you a roadmap, a recipe book, a playbook, you would do what was in front of you, but that's not how the world works for many of us. As we come back and we then decide, well, what should I do? And so we kind of look at the options in front of us and kind of pick the one that is most attractive, or maybe close our eyes and pick, and it feels so random. And after being in this world for over a decade and coaching over 1,000 people and helping them figure out what their what's next is, I've really determined that unless you get clarity on first your purpose, which is the best of what you have inside of you, which can be quantified. Once you get clarity on that, then it's clarity on your who. Who is it that you're most equipped to help right now? And then it's the how. How can you actually start to put something together and add value? Mm-hmm. So I love that your next book is about salary negotiation, which also too is so well dovetailed into this concept of value. That the more value you provide, the more you're going to be able to earn. And I've seen this in working with major Fortune 50 companies all around the world and being able to work with former professional athletes. And I even working right now with an analog astronaut. She tests toilets before they go to Mars. It's the coolest thing. But what I've learned in working across industries is that value is king, is how much can I help and serve other people. And so that clarity piece is step number one, is who are you helping, and how are you able to uniquely help them? Not just check a box, but how can you really tap into those core elements? I think the second thing that you have to focus on, and this is so incredibly important, is answering the question, is it worth it? Every element of motivation comes down to, is it worth it? So Mel Robbins talks a lot about how motivation is BS, and I think that there's maybe some truth to that. But what I like to say is motivation is really just answering the question, is what I'm doing worth it? You can apply this to your life, to your finances, to your fitness, to your spirituality. Every element of your life you can come back to and measure my motivation based off of answering the question, is what I'm doing worth it? Because if it is worth it, I'm willing to sacrifice, I'm willing to move, I'm willing to give up, I'm willing to invest. But if I'm not 100% sure that what I'm doing is worth it, then I'm not going to. And so that's the second kind of part of the question, is you have to determine, is what I'm doing worth it? Am I willing to take this job for right now that isn't giving me the salary I expected, but it's going to give me the opportunity for exposure for mentorship? Or is it that I'm willing to take this job that is really high paying so that way I can pay off my debt or get my family into a home that we are really excited and proud about? Answering that question, is it worth it? And then the third part of it really comes down to measuring what matters. So oftentimes we go through life and then we blink and we wake up and we're like, man, how did it already get 6 months or 2 years or 10 years? Days turn into decades like this. And so if you're not paying attention to measuring what really matters, it gets really easy to let those days, weeks, and decades really slip by. So what should you be measuring? I think one of the core elements is, what's kind of my level of impact? We kind of go after 3 I's: income, impact, and influence. So what's my level of impact? Am I happy with the level of impact that I have in my life? Personally, I measure my impact every quarter. My husband and I get together and we say, hey, how are we doing when it comes to our impact? Like our charitable contributions, are we measuring that? The level of our relationships, are we truly impacting others? Faith is important to us, so we have a measurement of that. So that impact is really key. The income piece of it, are we making the kind of influential investments that we're making? Are we doing the kind of revenues as a company of 2 different companies? So we're looking at the income level. Are we measuring that quarter by quarter? I basically run my life based off of quarters, which makes things pretty easy. And then finally, influence. Influence is I leaving every person that I hang out with, talk to, serve, connect with, employ. Are they better because they met me or not? Mm-hmm. And that's the most important thing that we really kind of do to keep sober on the work that we're doing, how hard we're chasing, all of those things, because one of our mentors is John Maxwell, and he says, I measure my life by asking the people around me, what do they think about me? The people closest to you, what do they think about me? Because your super fans, your followers on social media, your readers of your book, they could all think you're the best. But to the people closest to you, the ones who really know your thoughts and words and deeds, what do they think about you? And is that consistent? So those are the 3 areas that we measure every quarter.
I like that you do this every 3 or 4 months, because it keeps those goals are very short term. And then the check-in and the reality check, because it creates accountability too. Like, I'm going to take a hard stop and take a look at all of this. So, I can try this. I can throw spaghetti to the wall on some ideas. And if it doesn't work, right, I can reevaluate. So I like that you're in partnership with your husband, and you said 2 different companies. Are they both coaching and mentoring and helpful services?
One is Expert School. So Expert School is really focused on helping people become branded experts using their purpose. So we've helped over 1,000 people really get clear on their purpose and turn it into things like books, TEDx talks, speaking engagements. It's a really beautiful, special thing. The other company that we have is called the Purpose Company. So the Purpose Company is really focused on purpose discovery for teams and leaders. And so we work with major companies, teams. We just finished up an engagement working with Dollywood, which was so stinking fun, and the Harlem Globetrotters and folks over at Hershend, really helping connect purpose to what they're doing all the time. And so we work with individuals to help them step into their purpose, but we also work with teams and companies to really make sure that as people are growing inside of their company and their career, that they know, is it worth it? And they're connecting their purpose to the mission, because we say all the time that purpose personalizes the mission. Most companies and organizations have mission statements, but the individuals leading those companies and working at those companies have become really detached from it. And so we not only help align them to that mission, but we really help people identify who they are and how they can help specifically by using things like our purpose factor assessment and a couple of our other training tools where we come in and work with executive teams. So that way they know that they're really building a company for good.
I know a lot of folks are going to want to get a hold of you, and your name is unusual. So for those who are just listening with earpods, spell it out, and then will get you to do something that everyone does, which is your last alibi. But first, how do you spell your name? How do people find you? And how might they engage with you?
I absolutely have been so honored to be a part of this community and give back alongside you, which is incredible. For your audience, we actually have a free Step into Your Purpose Leader Guide. So all they need to do is text the word purpose to 33777. So literally just text the word purpose to 33777, and it will send you that free leader guide. It's a really good, easy checklist for you to determine, am I aligned? What should I do next? And it's got some great tools and opportunities to connect with me on things like LinkedIn. Because yes, my name is a little unusual. So it's Gabrielle, Gabrielle, Bosché, Bosche. But people can also pick up a copy of our book, The Purpose Factor. So you can go to purposefactorbook.com and pick up a copy there. Of course, it's on Amazon, but it's a really incredible tool. Brian and I, my husband and business partner, we wrote this book really for people who are in transition, finding an answer to that question of what's next for me. And it's a really amazing guidebook and playbook for people who are wanting to have a system that they can feel 110% confident that they know what's next for them.
Why don't you close up your segment with something, and by the way, that's a military term. When I've ever been on any DoD-supported calls, they always like, okay, any last alibis? So this will resonate with our audience today. What's your last alibi?
I think the most important thing that anytime I talk to anybody or speak at a conference or just have a conversation with someone one-on-one on Zoom or whatever, is to know that you're worth it. Number one, that the work that you do is worth it, but also two, that you're worth it. So oftentimes we will do anything for other people. We'll sacrifice so much for our families. People in the service community, they've sacrificed so much for this country, but really answering the question for you is, again, is what I'm doing worth it, and am I worth it? And knowing that you are, and having that confidence factor that you have something completely unique, completely beautiful, completely optimized for this day and this season to give to the world. And so when you have that confidence that you know that even if you don't know the answer right now, you can go find the answer, you know that you have agency, that you've got the ability to get stuff done, that you can help serve people, make someone's day better, that's really the place of confidence. Like, that's the cradle of confidence, of making sure that you actually know that you have what it takes to push through and make things happen. So that's what I would say, is I just want to encourage your listeners just to know that they're worth it, to lean into the fact that they can do so much and be so much more. Just saying yes and saying, I know that the journey's worth it.
I love this. Thank you so much. All right. You've been listening to the words and wisdom of Gabrielle Bosché. She has The Purpose Factor and The Purpose Company. The Purpose Factor is the book, but today you can get something for free. I love free. Thank you so much for creating that. Text the word purpose to 33777. That's purpose, Purpose. Text it to 33777 and you'll get a guide. You'll have a chance to interact with her just like we have today, and also learn so much more about your identity, your purpose as you move to your next career after the military, or the career that you've been in the civilian world. All right. My name's Cheryl Cross. Thanks so much for joining us today. You're listening to the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour. We're going to move over to our next segment, which is somebody who's been out of the military at least one, but not more than 4 years. We're going to hear their journey. Stay tuned.
Did you know that each year, more than 200,000 service members leave the U.S. military to find new careers? If you or someone you know is planning to leave service, our host, Cheryl Cross, has taken her 20 years of HR experience and written an essential guidebook for people just like you. It's called Civilian Mission, the 3-year guide for military professionals planning civilian careers, and it's available online at Amazon and other major retailers. Civilian Mission is packed with essential information to help you ease the gap between military service and your next exciting career after the military. Before we get back to the show, we want to say thanks for listening to the podcast. We appreciate your support. Now, back to the show.
We're sitting at the bottom of our segments, and this segment is interesting because this is the 1 to 4 year veteran segment. We find people who want to talk to you about their career transition. They're between 1 and 4, but not more than 5, because that's the next segment. And what I find in this group is that folks are really trying to figure things out. And our next guest certainly has. He's got lots going on, a lot of road behind him, but a lot of road ahead of him. I'd like you to meet Tyler Schmoker. Hi, Tyler. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Cheryl.
I know you're on the podcast circuit. I've seen a lot of your shows. I definitely enjoy your writing on LinkedIn. So I appreciate you wanting to tell your unusual story. Why don't you just launch, since you're so good at talking about this, and tell us where you started, where you went, and how you got to where you are?
So I started on a family farm in North Dakota, so very rural. I was in the United States Army, active component. Did a 4-year enlistment on active duty. Was stationed in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and then did a tour like immediately on the Korean border. In fact, I was on an outpost that was 6 miles off the border. So both of those stations were very formative for me, especially in that, I was able to hone my craft in a very focused way through training exercises and being really focused on Army stuff. But at the time then I made a decision, and I think it was at a time where re-enlistment didn't really have any sort of bonuses or incentives, so couldn't change an MOS to a better MOS. I couldn't, get a choice of duty station or airborne school or anything like that. So I said, you know what, it's been real fun, Army, but not real fun. So I ended up transitioning into the National Guard because I wanted to stay connected with the military community and continue to serve, but then also go to college and use my GI Bill. I'd started my career pre 9/11 and ended up ETSing from active duty post 9/11. And in fact, I remember sitting in our small chow hall at our outpost in Korea and seeing the invasion of Iraq happening, right? So I figured that there was probably going to be an opportunity at some point to still deploy even as a National Guard service member, and eventually, ended up deploying to Hurricane Katrina. I was at the Superdome pre-landfall of Hurricane Katrina as part of a state quick reaction force. Eventually got onto a deployment to Iraq. And then still in the National Guard, I ended up getting into private military contracting and did some overseas embedded contracting work as a civilian, contracted by DOD, and I was embedded with the Afghan National Army. So really, in totality, I would say that although my first 4 years was active duty, between training opportunities, deployments, and those types of things, for all intents and purposes, I like to say that the first 9 to 10 years of my career, I was really making a living doing purely military stuff. I was able to transition into the private sector, and I got into corporate security and eventually corporate security consulting, worked with large Fortune 500s, all sorts of different customers in different verticals, and started learning the business of security and the business of operations a little bit beyond just the tactical stuff that a lot of service members get. So that's where I started to learn about managing FTEs and productive time and budgets and scopes of work and contractual compliance and all of these other things that I think it's important for veterans to start taking in that information, since in the military, it's very heavy on planning and forecasting and projections and tactics and doctrine and those types of things, and even philosophy and art and theory of leadership. But where it's a little bit lacking in some cases, unless you're at the senior levels in the military, and I would say even then it's still minimal, is really understanding budgetary consideration and what's the cost of doing business, because it's the government. It's either you get the stuff or you don't, and in most cases the government's deciding what's the equipment that you're getting, where are you going, when are you going there. So I think it's those things that is particularly senior leaders who are looking to retire out of the military, it's kind of starting to up their financial acumen, I would say, definitely, and understanding the business of what it is that they're doing. And then also understanding that when you're going into those private sector organizations, to remember that you are the person that the expectation is on to you to change and adjust. in the past it was, okay, well, I'm a master sergeant or I'm a captain, I take on my new company, and then I reform SOPs around what I want. But when you go into the private sector, it is the complete opposite. And I think that causes a lot of folks to maybe have some challenges with their transition. It's like the back in the Army. The back in the Army, we did this. It's like, so we're going to do this here. It's like, well, you're in a Fortune 500 now, or even a small to mid-sized business. It's like, they have their own way of doing things. They have their own jargon. They have their own language. It's not to say you can't bring the best aspects of what you learned and what you did and how you honed your craft serving your country, but it's also important to be cognizant of the fact that you're coming into a new program. So take the opportunity to start over, start to learn those things, and be able to talk that talk and speak that language. And then if you're able to do that, the same way that the cream rose to the top within the military and how you manage your career, that's the same thing you can do within the private sector. So I would like to think that I've done that over the past 10, 15 years, working within corporate security and getting to see behind the curtain of a lot of Fortune 500s and consulting and picking up a lot of best practices. And then also, there are always some bad examples out there, but bad examples are also good examples. So you just kind of take all of those things with you. And it's like the things that not to repeat are the things that you wouldn't do, as well as those good things that you glean from all of these different relationships and all of these different engagements that you have, and then you apply them. And I guess that really fast forward to this point, that takes me to where I founded my little lemonade stand. It's a boutique consulting firm called Winsley. High performance coaching, consulting and advisory services, but it's really taking all of those best aspects of what I learned as a senior military member in operations, intelligence, and then also what I picked up from the private sector on the corporate security side, as well as with consulting, and really fuse that all together. And so I'd like to think that I've packaged that as a nice offering that's approachable for small to mid-sized businesses that are looking for assistance, whether it's enterprise project and program management. Maybe it's a veteran-owned business that they know that they want to do this, but they don't necessarily have the financial acumen. So I can be that trusted advisor that's maybe multilingual between military speak and then also commercial speak, and kind of can get them spun up on things that they need to do to speak the right language within the sector that they're trying to get into as an entrepreneur. And then also working with organizations that maybe have a need for some level of like corporate security, risk assessment, consulting type of work. And they're not comfortable with going to a McKinsey or a Deloitte or something like that. I think I provide an offering that's a little bit more approachable to smaller businesses. So that's where I'm at now. So again, I'm very early in the stages of starting over myself and transitioning from military, transition to the private sector, and now I'm transitioning to entrepreneur stuff. And I can say that in the last 6 months, I've learned a lot of new skills that I would have probably never learned on even in the military or the private sector. My biggest wins were last week. I finally gritted my teeth and went through the process, painstaking of creating my own no-code website. And it's one page and really simple, but it's one of those things where it's like, these are things that maybe you would have never done, and is it perfect, and is it one page, and it's not super fancy, but you can kind of take a look at those things and step back and say, well, I just did something new. And so you're always learning. They talk about lifetime learners, and I would like to think that I'm not too old of a dog that I can't learn some new tricks. So now being in the solopreneur space, I think I'm kind of forcing myself out of that comfort zone again, and building a network of potential clients and leads, and have some existing clients, and just building the business one step at a time.
It's a grind, man. And
Certainly.
You didn't even take a breath, by the way, for 9 minutes. I was watching you like, excellent. So this is the true spirit of an entrepreneur, exactly what Tyler just showed you. He is absolutely fueled by the passion of what he's doing. And this is not an ad. I just met Tyler literally 15 minutes ago. But I want you to know, for those of you listening, that when you do align with a passion, and I'm speaking as an entrepreneur who does a podcast, I taught myself, even though I was in broadcasting years ago, I taught myself all of these things so I could get to this point. And it was a learning curve, let me tell you. But you have the purpose. You're driven by the purpose of getting to the end point. And I think that truly, if you could put entrepreneurship in a bottle, it would be lit on fire and glow in the dark, because that's what you have in you to get this stuff done. It's hard, but it's not impossible. Tyler, you mentioned something before we hit the record button, that you had kind of made a journey as you were evolving into who you are today. You wanted to go and be aligned corporate-wise. I'm curious what has kind of pulled you over back to the veteran community, and how are you serving it again?
So I think where it really came full circle for me really has a little bit to do with my age, quite honestly. So, considering that I transitioned off of active duty into the National Guard when, I was in my early 20s. And like a lot of people, it's like, well, I didn't get to do the things that I wanted to do or whatever. And so you could easily go away with it saying, well, I did this thing and it was fine, but now I'm moving on, right? So instead, I kind of for a period of time, I would say that I maybe fell into that category. I was never bitter about service or anything like that. Proud of all of my experiences, but it was a situation where it's like, well, I'm too cool for school, so I'm just going to focus on being a corporate person now. And so I'm not going to be the veteran that goes into, a corporate setting with the same haircut. And I'm not going to be the guy that's just talking about, this one time in band camp back when I was in the Army. So unfortunately, I made kind of an extreme swing to the other side of the spectrum, to where a lot of colleagues that I'd known for years were like, I didn't even know you were in the reserves, or I didn't know that you ever served. I had a supervisor at one point within a large security firm who I respect very much and who was a very good leader. And he's going through my bio and he looks and he goes, I didn't know that you were an E8 in the Army. I think that he knew I'd been in the Army, but he assumed that I was a one-time enlistment. I did my job, did my 3, 4, 5 years, whatever. And then I got out, and then I went out into the world. Some people separate after an enlistment. Some people go mid-career. Some people do a full 20. And then like me, I kind of split it up between active duty, National Guard, and Reserve. I hadn't done a very good job about self-promoting some of the things that probably could have helped me professionally along the way and highlighting some of those experiences that I had. Instead, I was coming into a corporate setting kind of like a new employee. I had some degrees or whatever, but I'm going to pick it up and learn the ropes. And so I realized then that I need to do a better job about telling that story for my own career progression, so that people in my sphere of influence or sphere of concern professionally appreciate what it is that I've done, without me being ridiculous about it and saying I'm the best thing ever or whatever. But it's like, I've been to some cool places, I've done some cool things, and I've dealt with some really challenging circumstances and led people through those circumstances on what might have been the worst possible day of their entire lives. And so it's like, I need to do a better job of telling that story. And then when I started doing that and trying to craft it in a way that was respectful to the service and also respectful to my career, and not selling out or anything like that, but just telling a complete story of who I am as a professional, both military and a corporate professional, I saw that there were also other people out there who were maybe struggling with that. Like, a lot of veterans, they pride themselves on a lot of humility, right? But then they don't necessarily sell themselves. Or on the flip side of that, it's like, they know that their service mattered, but it might be pumped up to an 11 to where they bust into an organization. It's like, well, back in the Navy or the Army, we did this thing, and now you're going to bend to my will because I was a senior person, and now here I am, when that's not the case. So it's kind of finding that balance. So, and then after I kind of came to that realization myself, it's been like an incremental progress or process of trying to blend those two things together and create a brand and a perception and awareness that has supported me professionally. And then also, I'd like to think that my example is one that other folks can look to and follow and say, well, here's a guy who's kind of split the difference between his military career, his professional career, his commercial career, as well as education and those other things, and started to blend it all together. So, you're a diverse, holistic professional, and you're not necessarily a one-trick pony who, once you get outside of that box of things that you have supreme expertise in, you fall apart. And because like we were talking about before, Cheryl, it's kind of being a Swiss Army knife and being able to figure stuff out. Because once you get into that engagement, whether it's in a W-2 job or whether you're an entrepreneur and you're consulting or whatever, it's like that creates all sorts of vectors of approach and opportunities to upsell and cross-sell and make those relationships sticky. Like we were talking about, I have a client who I came in to do some consulting work for as far as like business, organizational design and change management and those types of things. And then we got on the subject of LinkedIn because I've established a little bit of a presence there, and I'm going through all these things that this person can do. And then she's like, this is all great. I don't have the time for it, but I want to do it. So can I pay you to do it for me? It's like, so that's one of those things where it's like, I never intended to be a ghostwriter for an executive, but that's where those opportunities come up. And in the process of that, it's been really cool for me too, because it's a vertical that I hadn't worked in personally before, but I was starting to glean information from her about the market vertical that she's in, and also the industry verticals so now I'm learning things about this just through writing this stuff. And of course I'll send the drafts, and if there's something that needs to be adjusted a little bit for the sake of accuracy, but now I'm starting to learn that jargon. So it's just really cool how those kinds of experiences come up when you have a diverse skill set, and the flexibility to take on new things creates new opportunities.
I want to know how you balance, because when you do have that fire in the belly that glows in the dark that I want to bottle and sell to the public, that's not something you can just put on the shelf sometimes. But how do you do it? How do you keep a balance?
So I hit a tipping point. It was probably about 10 years ago. I had been extremely career focused and career driven as far as esteem and getting the next role. If I was a manager, I wanted to be a senior manager, then a director, senior director, vice president, all of those things. But as I was doing that, I was starting to find that if opportunities weren't presented to me for just a number of different reasons, say I was a director and I should have gotten a VP position, but I didn't get it. And maybe it was because of the perception, well, he's still too young, or he's too new, or there's someone else who's been in the organization longer and they're not as good, but we're going to give them a good last 5 years. Because the reality is stuff like that can and does happen. Yes. Right? So the thing is, I found that I was in a vulnerable position then, in that when those types of things didn't go my way, even though maybe I was the best person for the job, it's like I wasn't necessarily considering all the different atmospherics that can go into that. There's a lot of politics. I'm not saying good, bad. Organizations are inherently political. The bigger they get, because people are political. It's just the way that we are. It's not good or bad. It's just the way that it is. When those things happened to me, I found that I was starting to become resentful, or I was mad because, well, I'm way better than this person who got this job. And maybe practically speaking, that's true. Maybe I hadn't networked the right way, or just there could be a number of different reasons why that didn't work out. So I took a step back and I'm like, why am I so ticked off? Because I promoted pretty well in the military. I was also currently promoting at a relatively fast rate within large security firms and doing corporate consulting work, but I wasn't getting any happier. I was getting more money. I was gradually getting more roles, but I wasn't getting any happier. And it's like, well, I don't have any other interests. And I had a good friend who since passed away, but he was always extremely hobby heavy. And I would ask him, I was like, how do you do this? I'm just not interested in anything. I'm so focused on work and the traditional definitions of what success and career progression are. He's like, it's like a circus inside my mind. He's like, I wish I could do more. So from there, I started to kind of force myself. It's like, well, I'm going to force myself into some hobbies. And then I eventually got to a point where it came more naturally. And it's like, well, I can do things that I consider professionally conducive hobbies, right? And maybe it's professionally conducive because it keeps me fit and there's still a level of fitness that was required for my job. Or maybe it's a marketing and branding opportunity. I climb mountains because I like climbing mountains, but I also find that climbing mountains is not the worst for branding, because it also falls in line with operational planning, project management, And also, it's just something really cool that if someone's rapidly scrolling through a bunch of junk on the socials, you see someone standing on a mountaintop, that's usually going to slow it down for just a minute. And maybe that's enough to get them to click on me and create a frictionless point of engagement to where we can connect and maybe we do business at some point. And then over time, that turned into where I found that they were kind of like on an equal balance as opposed to being this huge offset that they were at one point where, hobbies are as important to me as is my professional success, because they really are symbiotic. Because if I'm happier, I can be more passionate about the work. And if I don't have hobbies and I'm just doing stuff that's purely work, I start to hate it and I don't want to do it and I suffer professionally. So for me, I went from being no hobbies, very focused, highly professional head shop, and I didn't like what I was doing anymore. Even though maybe I was one of the best in the game at it, but then I started, I'm going to take some vacation. I'm going to go on a climbing trip. I'm going to go out and run. I'm going to plant a garden. I'm going to do these other things. And it's just really rounded me out. So there's always time for professionally conducive hobbies. There's always time.
I want people to know that they can get a hold of you, not just to engage with you on a business level, but you did offer your hand up, as everyone has, as a potential mentor. How might someone get a hold of you? And for the people that are just listening, can you spell your last name? Because it doesn't spell like it sounds. So teach us that.
Sure. So my name is Tyler Schmoker. That's Schmoker. It's a good German name. The best places to find me are on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find on there. And I also recently just launched my new company website. It has backlinks to socials and calendars and those types of things. So it's www.winsleyllc.com. That's Winsley, L-Y. And so feel free to check me out. I'm happy to connect with veterans or people that are just interested in the space and see if we can do something together.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for letting me platform you. I ask everybody this, and I want you to close your own segment, and I'd like to use a military term, and that is, what's your last alibi for our listeners?
I'm going to go simple with this one, and I'm going to pull from my own social media presence and say, figure out what your tagline is that's going to work for you and it's going to scale and stay with it. So for me, that's stay capable. And I think that covers a lot of different areas. That covers your life domain, your professional domain. And then because I still have one foot within the security industry in a consulting capacity, I think it directly kind of contributes to helping organizations stay prepared and protecting their people and their visitors and their vendors and their assets and their reputation. So that's it. 2 words, stay capable.
Right on. You were listening to Tyler Schmoker. His company is called Winsley, which means win simply, 2 words stuck together. And you can find him online for LinkedIn and his website. Thanks, Tyler. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
You bet. I'm Cheryl Cross. You're listening to the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour. We're going to be right back after this very brief break, and we're going to be talking to somebody who's been out of the military a minimum of 5 years. Stay tuned.
If you or someone you know would like to be featured on the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour podcast, write to us at the letter X, changepodcast.com. That's xchangepodcast.com. Thank you again for your support. Now, let's get back to the show.
We're back to round off our Power Hour with our 5+ year veteran and expert. I'd like to introduce you to someone who's not only a friend, but a colleague in the HR world, somebody who's been in talent acquisition after a career in the Navy. Please meet my friend and colleague, Chris Morga. Hi, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Cheryl. Thank you so much for having me on.
I forgot to mention that Chris is also a podcaster, and he recently had me on his show, and my son and I were driving around Hawaii listening to it, and it's really hard to listen to yourself when you're a host, be a guest. But like I said on your show, it's kind of neat to have someone drive the car, and you get to see all the scenery from that side of the car. So thank you for having me on, and welcome today.
It is such a change, isn't it, when you're sitting in the driver's seat versus a passenger seat, and then you look at everything and you kind of adapt new new things too. I've learned so much from you and how you handle your show and your community that you've taught me without even teaching. So thank you for that.
You're very kind. I think that's a perfect tee up for being in the driver's seat versus the passenger seat. You left the Navy after a few years and went into what? What was your career journey after those few years in the Navy?
You know, like a lot of people, when I came out of the service and came home, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, or what was I going to be when I grew up, right? And luckily, I had a community, and I had a friend of mine that was very well established in the auto industry, and he said, "Why don't you come and sell cars with me?" Don't hold that against me. But I got into the car sales business, and I stayed for 12 years, just because I didn't necessarily know what I transitioned to. When I came, my civilian job out of the Navy would have been an air traffic controller. And as I looked more and more into that, it just didn't really resonate with me, being a communications type of person and just loving to talk to people and meet new people, that sales just resonated well. So luckily I had that community that drove me right into sales, and 12 years later.
Well, everybody needs to buy a car. And I find it really hard to find people I trust when I go to buy a car.
Yeah.
So were you that trustworthy person?
I was. I always tried to do the right because, I was in it for the long play. And I believe in families, why I joined in the military, to protect families and to protect the country, right? So I always wanted to make sure that families and generations were constantly coming back to me. So I was one of the only nerds that rain, snow, shine, after you bought a car from me, I would stand out in the parking lot so you could see me in your rearview mirror smiling and waving at you.
That's
and
nice.
Everybody got a kick out of that. But you know what? It's just made for a good memory for a lot of the customers, and they would come back for simple little things like that.
So selling people useful things has continued on in your career. I don't call you a salesperson. I don't consider people who do what we do sales at all. So when people come to me and say, well, you're a great salesperson, it's like, I don't like that term for what I do. I'm a connector. I'm making, whatever. I'm not putting down salespeople, but you have driven a line through your career. We talked about it earlier. Pull the thread for me on how you went from E4 car sales to where you are now. What's in between?
I was blessed. Not many people go through career transitions or multiple career transitions in their lives. They'll spend a lot of time going through a very linear career that will drive from one company to the next, but staying in same industries. Mine was very change-worthy, and I was blessed to be able to have 3 transitions in my career. So after car sales, we found ourselves married. We were having our first child, and my wife looked at me and said, "You need to get a real job now."
Oh,
So I went to a data protection company. I became an information governance project manager, and they threw me into Manhattan at some of the largest law firms and banks. And I wound up being that for 8 years in Manhattan. And, after that, I was working on a job on Wall Street, and I got cut. It was a contract role. I really thought I had made it. I thought, wow, I'm on Wall Street. This is great. And I was told to fire my team, and then they fired me 2 days later. So looking for jobs, making sure that the family could still survive, we could still thrive in there. And I went to the bottom of the barrel. I got to be honest with you. I was folding clothes in a laundromat for cash under the table just to make sure we could make rent. And it all started to fall apart. And we became homeless with 2 kids. And I had to go to my mother-in-law, hat in hand. And I was trying everything, and nobody was reading my resume. So one stormy night, I got a phone call, and a recruiting company had said to me, "Listen, you understand project management. We understand that you know technology. Would you like to be a recruiter?" Honestly, Cheryl, I took the job completely out of anger because I was like, this is not right. Why can't I get anybody to call me? I want to see what's going on behind the scenes. And I'll never forget, I started my first day as a recruiter, and they put me on a COBOL 2 programmer for a healthcare company. I had no idea what I was doing. Well, I wound up getting this gentleman a position, and he said to me, it was right around November, and he said, "Chris, you don't know what you did for my family. around the holidays. That was it. And, 10 years later, I'm still in recruiting and career coaching
Yeah.
because of that memory and what I was able to do to impact lives and help people for the better. Like most people in recruiting or HR, it kind of falls in your lap. I don't think anybody wakes up and says, I want to be a recruiter when I grow
No.
up. So that kind of stuck with me. And now, it's been such an incredible journey.
And you've moved so far into the role and have expanded on it so much. You were talking to me before we hit record about the career insurance plan community. Tell me how you've built this and what it serves and really where you're going with it. Curious.
Yeah, the career insurance plan is designed for a lot of people that go through life every day, like I was saying, about a very linear career. And we have insurance on our houses, health insurance, life insurance. And it dawned on me, why don't we have career insurance? Why aren't we setting ourselves up for the next phase or the next chapter in our career? So I worked with a couple people from LinkedIn that are friends of mine and a couple people that are content creators. And I started telling them, I want to build a community where people will have on-demand access to some of the best career coaches, the best recruiters, so that way they feel comfortable to know that they have someone in their pocket, as it were, before an interview that they can reach out to and instantaneously get interview questions, get templates that are widely accepted for resume, get, on-demand advice. So it dawned on me the career insurance plan, and I set up a community now that we're in development where we're pulling people in. It's a private community, so they know that they're going to be with like-minded individuals and they'll have that on demand. And it's been getting some great notoriety. I mean, I'm very humbled on how much traction. It all started from some of my colleagues at my last company that were laid off, and there was about 300 of them. And they all reached out to me and said, can we join a Slack community? And can we kind of pick your brain and find out what you've been doing to stay relevant in this industry? And that's where it all started. I joined this Slack community, and then I worked with another back-end company to build this community, and we're almost done. We should be launching in a few days.
That's exciting. This podcast is timeless, by the way. So do check out Christopher Morga on LinkedIn and see where he's at with this. If people wanted to get a hold of you for this specifically, what's the route that you envision?
My favorite social platform by far, this as well, is LinkedIn. I spend almost every single day on LinkedIn just because I love the business minded. So you can follow me at Chris Morga CPCC. That's my LinkedIn handle. And I'm on Twitter at mostly Chris. And the community will be pushed out to there. So there'll definitely be links and tie-ins to the community where people can not have to jump too far away. That's the one thing that I really want to drive home is ease of use. I want people to be able to find what they need quickly. So you can go to LinkedIn as a barrier or as a buffer and then right to the community.
I'm going to pivot because I know that we're going to circle back to what you're doing and what you're creating. But I want to talk about what you're doing as a continuation of the mission, more or less. You and I both speak in this community, military to civilian career transition, and I've always found your feedback very valuable. You, unlike me, have experience in the service. Tell me what your sort of thoughts are about where people are going these days in their career. You're working with some folks in the military, coming out of the military, folks who have served. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? Because you're kind of a trendster, my friend. You're kind of a trendster.
Well, thank you for that. I don't think I've ever been called that in my life, but I'll take it. A lot of the people are just, it's not really changed. A lot of the people that are coming out of the military that I work with, it's the fear of the unknown, right? You have such a set structure in the military. You know what you're doing from moment to moment. You know exactly what's expected of you. When you come out and go into the private sector, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of companies that have great onboarding experiences, that have great development experiences. But for the military professional coming into that, it's a totally different ballgame because there's a lot of I in the private sector, where in the military, it is team first. It's always about we. And I find that some of my clients coming out into the private sector, that's where they get a little bit tripped up because the communication styles are very, very different, and it almost puts them at a loss. They go, well, what trajectory should I be going on? Or how do I further my career? What happens after the 90 days that I've been in my job? How do I set myself up for success for that? So a lot of the programs that I've created stemmed from that because I like structure and I like to know what I'm doing, on a daily basis. So I always deliver that to my clients. And I would say to anybody that's thinking about transitioning out is to start putting your daily structure and your daily routine in place because there's always a changeover. There's a natural shift from military to civilian life. It's just called something different. That's all it really is. It's just a different term. So you can follow the same strategies and you can follow the same structure in a corporation and still get by very well and still build your career upon that.
What are those things? I always say you're brave, you're strong, you're skilled, you're trained. Those are big buckets. What are some of the smaller buckets that you see people utilizing as they transfer into this corporate speak or corporate environment?
Well, the routines, you have to lean back on the routines. That's one of the strengths that every military member has is those routines. You've learned to create mastery out of them being in the military. And that's very, very important because that mastery will carry over. And going back to your question about the trends, a lot of the people that I talk to are coming out and they're very excited in tech because the private sector has some very, very deep resources and deep pockets to be able to advance on some of the technology that the government has available. So in that trend, the routines that you've been learning in the military and you've been perfecting translate very, very well into that tech sector because there is steps and priority sets within that, especially within technical project management too. That's where a lot of the military members come out and they get excited about project management because it's the structure, it's the organization. So it's a one-to-one marriage almost.
Let's talk about project management because PMP, Agile, Scrum, there's so many different ways that you can look at project management. There's different theories. What do you tell a client that says, I want to go get my PMP, or maybe I want to become a Scrum Master, or how would you guide them?
First question, most important question, why? That's a very, very important question that anybody going to looking for a career coach or even going into an organization, anybody's going to ask you why. Why is it necessary that the PMP is important to you? Is it because it's a buzzword? Is it because it's going to set you up for a certain structure? Is it comfortability? So to understand why is major importance. That's self-understanding coming out and transitioning such a major transition. You have to ask yourself why you're doing anything. Why do you want to get into a certain company? Why do you want that title? Why do you want a PMP? Why do you want a CSM? Once you understand that, it's just like going into business. You understand who your ICP is or your ideal client persona is. If you don't understand that, everything's going to be very messy. So ask yourself why you want these things and really dive deep into why you want to move into these sectors or get these certifications. And that'll tell you a lot about who you are and what your strengths are, because you have to start from there. A lot of times I'll work with clients and I'll say, what's the end game? At the end of the day, when you hang up your hat, what's a successful career look like for you? And a lot of people get thrown back by that because they're like, I don't know, I wanted to get into project management when I came out of the service because, it seems to be very popular. It seems to be touted very much. But what's the end game for you? Because it's much easier to reverse engineer and create a plan of structure to get you towards that end game when you know what it is. So start there.
What about those folks who really don't know? How do you guide somebody who really has just no idea? They're coming around the bend. They're probably in their last 180 days of their transition, and they're going to take anything. If you had a chance to talk to those folks, because there's probably a few of them listening, what would you say?
That is awesome. You teed that up perfectly. I just got into a conversation about this earlier today. Somebody that doesn't necessarily know what they want to transition to. I don't know what it is. Here's what you do. It's unorthodox, but here's what you do. Grab your top 5 closest people to you and ask them, what am I known for by you? What's my biggest strength? Why do you come to me for knowledge? What do I impact for you? And ask them to write something back to you on what your strengths are, because that'll start to shape an idea of who you really are, because the people closest to you know you the best, and they'll be able to give you an objective answer of who you are in their eyes. And then you can start to play. It's like Play-Doh. Then you could start to cultivate. You can play around with what those strengths are, and you'll identify. That's why I say 5 of them, is you'll identify the commonalities within that. Yeah, that will start setting you down the pathway. And it's all sequential. Anytime you're asking these self-knowledge or self-worth questions, you're opening up another pathway, and you'll get more answers. You don't have to have it all flushed out by the first question. It's an iteration. It's an evolution. And most military members understand that very, very well, what that evolution is and why it's important. So start with the 5 closest people to you and ask them what you're known for. Why do they come to you, and what's your strength in their eyes?
Interesting. So if you could pick 5 people, without naming names, who are close to you to do this evaluation, who would they be?
Well, obviously my wife would be one of them. My 2 children, my best friend of 35 years, and one of my colleagues that we became very close friends since we opened up an agency together about 6 years ago. Those are the 5.
Yeah. What do you think they'd say about you, Chris?
Oh, I actually did this exercise, so I know exactly what they said.
Tell us. Tell us. Tell us how this works.
As a joke, most of them, actually 4 of them, said to me, well, you're the Apple guy. Because you can't see it here, but I think I've bought every product Apple ever created. I just like the cohesiveness. So one of my strengths is technical process.
Okay.
I love to break down the technical and build a process. I'm also very strong in lists, process and writing down exactly what steps are. I love to map that out. Empowerment was something that my best friend and my wife said. Said all they need to do is come to me in 15 minutes and they feel like they want to pick up a building after talking to me. That's my most favorite strength that I have, because I love to make people feel that they can do anything that they want. That makes me feel good. That's my reward, is when I see that aha moment, or I see somebody say to me, wow, I can do that. You're right. I'm going to go do it. And then I get a text the next day. What was I supposed to go do? Yeah, but it really makes me feel good to see other people realize that strength. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that again?
I got a process for you. Yeah. I'm with you on that one. What were the other? You have 3 here: tech, process, list, empowerment. What were some of the other ones?
The process goes along with the coaching side of things. I think being a recruiter, I loved, because I loved marrying the business side and what the business needs are with the right talent that's driven and compelled to build on that. But the coaching was always where I really got the most out of it, because it enhances that process. Because I can listen to someone that says, Chris, I really want to achieve this. And in my mind, I'm automatically putting a whiteboard together. And I'm starting mind mapping techniques of going, okay, they want to be a vice president in 3 years in a financial industry. What are you at now? I'm a senior analyst. Okay. Now I know I know the hierarchy. I know exactly what steps we need to take. How do we start pulling responsibility off of your manager's plate that showcases you as the person that they go to? How do we build on your KPIs and your metrics so that way you can report them at your review time? Those are the things that I really, really love doing. And I think coaching is the strongest strength I have, because I don't do it for people. I can write a resume for people. I can't write one for myself, as most recruiters.
None of us can.
But I can write a resume for somebody in a good half hour, and I can marry those terms and keywords that they need to have in there. But I'd rather have someone be led down that pathway. Okay, well, what's the summary look like? What's the career summary that you want? What's the messaging you want to project? What are some of the key terms in your industry? And I'll ask them to start doing actions and taking these little initiatives. And I think I said this to you once before, is most of my clients, I love my clients, but I don't want to see them again after we're done.
Right.
I want to be able to deliver a framework and work with them each step of the way, so that the way they can pick up that framework and drop it into every chapter of their life. And it's repeatable. Teach a man how to fish, so to speak,
Yep.
right? Go to the old adage. But that's the strength I really appreciate the most, is the coaching and the aha moments. Those are the best. There's nothing better than those aha moments when they realize the strength that they have inside them.
You work with people along the same lines that I do. I'm not a coach, but you are coaching people one-on-one. I'm curious, what did you learn in the Navy that helped you either become this or fine-tune it? Because if you were to follow your MOS, you would be sitting in an air traffic control booth.
Yeah.
Not a lot of interaction. What was it that really, can you pull back on some of the experiences, things that you learned? That sounds like a very stressful environment. I don't know much about it, but I just know of it through movies and TV that it's highly stressful. There's not a lot of outside communication. You're communicating with pilots. You're giving very clear directions. And you probably need to unscrew a few problems so nobody runs into each other. How are you applying those skills to what you're doing now, or not?
I can map that back to Chief Petty Officer Sanderlin. I'll never forget the man. He rode my butt. He beat me up the whole time that I had him as one of my chiefs in the Navy. And he was also from New Jersey, so we had a lot of similarities. Afterwards, later down the line, he told me, he said, well, I recognized what the potential in you was, so I had to keep pushing you. And I had to keep pushing you. He goes, otherwise you never would have been who you are. And I think that really shaped who I am. You know, when I relegate with a client, you know, there are some clients, unfortunately, I just know we're not going to work well together. And I have to say no. And it really hurts me because I want to be able to help as many people as I possibly can. But sometimes you can tell. But Chief made sure that I was delivering that same aggression, but that same support that he gave to me in every one of my clients. So I can map that back to 1997 when Chief, had come to me and he was pushing me for everything, things I was scared of, when I was supposed to speak in front of a bunch of recruits, when I was supposed to, lead a run, or we had a refueling team on the ship and he wanted me to lead the 22-man refueling team. I was scared out of my mind. It was, what if I screw something up? But he would keep pushing me. And when he would say, what's the matter? What are you scared? What's the matter? What are you scared? And I didn't want to say yes. I felt, intimidated. I didn't want to tell this man yes, that I was afraid. And he would keep pushing me. And if he's listening, I want to say thank you, because every single thing that I've done in my life, I hear him in the back of my head saying, come on, Morga, let's go. One more or two more. Let's go. Get up, And that shaped my entire career and my life since then. So that's something I learned from the Navy that I'll always carry with me, is just keep pushing no matter how hard it gets, because you'll come out the other side much better than you thought you ever could.
That's a perfect way to end the segment. Thank you so much. And I hope he is listening, and maybe I'll find him just so he can. The person that wrote the foreword to my book mentioned his mentor. And I'm on the hunt to find that man's mentor, so I can send him the book because he mentions the mentor. So I'm with you on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
What would you like to leave our listeners with? Not only the way to get a hold of you in case they want to reach out to you, work with you, refer you, hire you, whatever, but also what would be your last alibi for them as well?
The one thing I really want to drive home, and that's why I created the career insurance plan, is I want you to ask yourself one question. And it's a very important question. I think it's very timely. So anyone listening to the show, ask yourself, what would your life look like if you never had to worry about a layoff again? Very simple question, but really powerful question. It's going to happen again. The truth is, we're always having layoffs. Companies have to do that to remain solvent. But what if you didn't have to worry about it? What if you got laid off and you could say to your manager, thank you, appreciate the opportunity. This was great. See you around. So ask yourself that question and then reach out to me and we'll talk.
Interesting. I think that's really very valuable for the folks like yourself who've been out in the workforce for some time. I've encountered quite a few that have been laid off within their first few years, but it mostly happens after the 5-year mark. So that's great. How about those transitioning service members? I know you work with a lot of them too. What about them?
For people coming out of the military or thinking about coming out of the military and going into the private sector, like I said before, ask yourself, what do you want? There is a one-to-one transition. Regardless what people say, technology is too advanced, it's too oversaturated. That's baloney. Ask yourself what you want and ask yourself what you want to do at the end. Start with the end game and reverse engineer a plan. Don't be afraid. I'm going to use the old adage, everything is just on the other side of fear.
It's so true. Christopher Morga, CPI. What is the last few letters after your name? What does that stand for?
Certified Professional Career Coach, CPCC.
CPCC.
They put me through the ringer, too, for that certification.
Well, I hear you're worth it. So thank you so much. Well, Chris, you and I talk all the time, so I know I'll be in touch with you. Thank you so much for honoring us today, not only with your story, but your transparency about how you ended up, what you did, and how you pivoted. I think that's very important for people to know, and really what you're doing for the community, creating an insurance plan. I think I'm going to turn off the record button and wonder what I would be like if I never had to deal with a layoff. I've never asked myself that question. So
yeah, it's a powerful question.
Thank
and
you.
to all of our people that are serving, thank you very much. From my family to you, thank you very, very much for keeping us safe. We really appreciate it.
And with that beautiful note, we're going to end this segment. My name is Cheryl Cross. You're listening to the Military to Civilian Career Transition Power Hour. We'll be back after this very brief break.